Welcome to Deep Deck. Gonna have a creative conversation.
Hello, welcome to Tape Deck, a podcast where I, artist, writer Declan Shelby, have a creative conversation, namely with a past or present collaborator in comics. My collab bro this episode is Colin Craker. Hailing from Ireland, Craker is a professional comic book artist and writer. Colin's work can be found in his own self-published series, the Agency Case Files, the Oxventure D&D series, or in the pages of the Terminator and Star Wars The High Republic Adventures. Colin only lives to draw comics and has no other hobbies or personality traits to speak of. Oh God, how I relate to that. Hey Colin, how's it going?
Oh, I'm great.
That in your bio, I was like, oh God, that should be in mine. I
always have a little takedown of myself in there. You know, you can't get too up on your high horse.
Good. I remember when I was starting out, I had to write a bio, you know, that would go on the back. I think it was when I was doing 28 Days Later, and I was looking around at other bios, and I saw, I won't say who, but this one said basically this amazing, what was it? It was like amazing, innovative. It's just the most bloated, self-aggrandizing thing, you know. And it was an amazing creator. So when I read it, I was like, yeah, fair enough. But then I read it again, I was like, hang on, you wrote this. Like, it's fine if somebody else writes it about you, but I know how it works now. You write it for yourself. So
yeah, if we're taking ourselves down, it can only go up from there.
Exactly. Like, yeah, lower your expectations, basically. So then it's all uphill. But yeah, thanks for joining me on here, man.
Thank you for having me.
Weirdly, did you just get a mad shower where you are? Because there was just a
yeah, it's torrential all of a sudden.
Yeah, I had to close the window because it's a lovely sunny day in County Clare and today, and it just rained out of nowhere before we started recording. And you also live in County Clare, in Shannon, where I lived when I was a kid, actually. So you've been in Shannon your whole life?
I have been. We've moved around a lot, you know, but mostly in the south of the country. You know, like I lived in Limerick for a bit, and then abroad for a while in England for like a year, and then back to Shannon. So I've always sort of been in Shannon, whether I like it or not.
How did you find comics then? Because I mean, we're both from the same county. Like, I think I actually saw my first American comic in Lahinch, which is like a seaside town, and I went to go get money from my mum to go pick it up. It was like X-Force or something. When I got back, it was gone. I was like, no. So I had to. That's what made me actually properly track them down. But what was your first like exposure to?
When I was young, my brothers and I used to watch the different Marvel animated series, you know, Spider-Man and X-Men, and we were always sort of into superheroes and stuff like that. But you know, we'd go to the local news agents and we'd pick up some of the, I think they were like, you know, you get ones that are Wolverine and Deadpool at the time, the Marvel UK ones, I think.
Is it the Panini stuff, was it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we used to always pick those up. And that was sort of my first kind of exposure to comics was through those. But I think I took a very long break for a long time, just because, you know, we weren't really in the position to keep buying comics. And I sort of rediscovered them around, it was about 2014 when the video game The Wolf Among Us came out. And I got really into Fables after that. And that was my window back into comics again. And I started reading them all through college and everything. And yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Was that specifically a Fables tie-in game?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, okay. It was like a prequel game to Fables, and they would always, you know, at the end, they sort of would tell you all about a little bit about the comics, and you could read these little files in the game all about the comics. And I was like, oh, I love this game. I really want to pick up these books, and I've read the whole series through, and that was sort of my window back into comics. You know, stuff that was outside of the superhero sort of spectrum.
Yeah, no, I think maybe Preacher was the same for me, just because like you read a lot of superhero stuff and then you hit a certain age where you just want to read something totally different.
Yeah, and I think that's even how I am now, where, you know, mostly I don't read a lot of superhero stuff anymore. I just read a lot of creator-owned books now.
So you were very creator-owned, like I know it's weird, like because I first saw your stuff online, and you were doing a lot of really good pin-up stuff. I can pop it up here. Uh, like you were doing, or you were doing what I was doing when I was starting out, which I think was, just when like things like Twitter was really taking off, it was really easy to like grab people's attention with like kind of pin-up stuff like this, and it was great at the time. I think the whole structure of everything has changed now. I feel like the pin-up stuff you do should catch eyeballs, and then the storytelling stuff you do should like lead to more stuff. But I feel you're like 5 years too late or 6 years too late.
Yeah.
The internet has moved on somehow, you know.
Yeah, and social media sort of exploded, and there's probably no sign of it really going back to the way it was. And now you're sort of, when you start off posting stuff like this, you're contending with an algorithm and keywords that are, that'll get you knocked down in the SEO searches and everything. So it's a lot tougher now than it was. But I think when I started doing this stuff, I sort of found a sweet spot of what I wanted on social media, is that I draw these little things, a couple of people would see them, and over time sort of built up an audience that was really looking at this stuff. Every time I draw Batman or whoever, most of the time it's Batman. But every time I draw these characters, there's a sort of core audience for those, and the more people share stuff around, the more people see it, but it is definitely harder now than it was. But like I used to just do these drawings mostly for a laugh. These would be like a couple hours, and then I'd post them online, get a few people to notice my work, and always underneath these drawings I would post a link to something I was doing, so that way, some way someone was seeing it.
Yeah, I mean, I see you even doing it now with promoting your latest Kickstarter. Like, I mean, it's smart. It's really, really smart. I don't know why it hasn't. Like, there's people with less skill than you have, like, and it's working. You always want to say like that. Talent is what it's the ultimate arbitrator, but it's not, like,
No, yeah.
So like, everything you're doing like is great, and I think you're so smart about what you do as well. Like I just don't know, hasn't, to me, this should have clicked through for you like a year ago.
Yeah, it would be great if, this industry was an actual meritocracy and we could get by just on pure skill, and, but
no, not me. If it was a pure meritocracy, I would not be in the, I would not be in the, I would not be in this industry. So forget that. But I do think, like, with the fan art, like if I was starting out, I would be doing this, because this is the stuff that grabs eyeballs. I think people can do too much of it, where all you do have is pin-up work, and what you really need to be making sure is that you're backing up with storytelling work, which, I mean, you have been doing, which is why I've always kind of like been, looking at what you're doing, going, oh, nice one, nice job, Colin. And then I go off and do my own thing. But you've actually like amassed a lot of great pin-up stuff. Like, I'd even say, I think, I mean, your pin-up stuff is what caught my eye, and then I saw that you were doing storytelling again, which was great. But like, you keep putting out great, like, eye-catching imagery. Like, is that still your strategy, or has it changed?
I think for the most part it is. Just because I met basically everyone I know in comics through Twitter, and it was because I was doing stuff like this. Where just sort of hitting niches of, a small subsection of Twitter really loves Spider-Man 2099, and then 5,000 people see that on Twitter, and then they all start following you. And some of those people might be, other peers or contemporaries within the industry, or editors, and even if, and especially when, they see that you've got actual comics work and sequential work to back it up, they'll come to you looking for, like, they'll say to you, have you ever drawn this character or that character? And now there's actually the work to show that, oh yeah, I've done a pinup of this character at some point, somewhen,
So has that happened?
It has, yeah. Whenever I was asked by Spencer Cushing, the editor at Dark Horse, to do the High Republic Adventures annual at the end of last year, he asked me to send him a portfolio of Star Wars stuff that I'd drawn before. And so I've drawn a million different Star Wars things, on these quick 2-3 hour drawings on Twitter. And so I could just quickly throw together a portfolio of that as well as a portfolio of all my sequential work, and then pass that on, and it made it easier going through the process of getting approved for Lucasfilm.
Yeah, I actually had something similar where when I broke it at Marvel, we were doing, me and the Irish guys were doing the Eclectic Mix blog. So we'd have a lot of, do we do themes? I can't remember. No, we just did a lot of fan art stuff. And I had done a lot of Marvel fan art stuff, like a Daredevil shot, of course, and one of the Hand. And then when Thunderbolts came up, I had, not only did I have a shot of Daredevil because it was a Daredevil crossover, but I had a shot of the Hand as they were being drawn in the series at the time, which is a bit different, which was great. But I was drawing 28 days later, so I could also prove the fact that I'm drawing a monthly book at the moment. So you need that two-pronged attack of having here I can do the fun stuff that catches people's attention, but also prove to editors, well, I can hit a deadline and I'm delivering this kind of work on a regular basis. Because the amount of people who just have pinups, I mean, even to this day, it's great. There's people can do amazing stuff, but then don't know how to draw a comic because they just never, or they might have drawn a couple of pages, which is great, but it's page 60. Yeah. When things start working out for you, So how has that learning curve been for you then?
I think it's just good practice to do that sort of thing. When I occasionally, I mean, it's not very often I get asked about it, but occasionally when I'm at a convention or something, you'll see someone's portfolio, and it's a lot of people show sample pages, of Marvel sample scripts, DC sample scripts, and those are great. But I think your time is better spent drawing something of your own that you can finish completely, even if it's just a short story, or there's always anthologies looking for short stories, but even if it's just something like that, you can show that you know how to finish a story, point A to point B. You'll cover a wider range of things, like little sort of character moments or big action scenes, and then you've also got the little pin-up drawings of famous characters that, you can say, I know how to draw this character. I know about how to make that character look eye-catching, or what is iconic about certain characters. But also I have, like you say, the storytelling to back it up. I think I might disagree with you on the storytelling side of it, and I might be wrong and you might be right, and I guess it depends. But as regards, I think you're right in saying doing your own thing, like making something like a storytelling, putting together a story that is your own. I think that because I actually just gave a bit of advice for this. The student was asking some questions, and one of the answers I had said is to work with from an artist's point of view, work with a writer, because if you want to work for Marvel DC, it's generally you're getting a script, and the figuring out how to make a script work visually is a different challenge from writing something and making it work visually, because like you say, you could have some small little moments, you can write in little minutiae and whatnot. But the bulk of being an artist, professional artist, isn't really that. It's trying to adapt, a block of text into a visual delivery system, basically. And I think writing your own stuff doesn't gel with that. What it does is it can emphasize great parts of your storytelling, but it can also emphasize terrible parts of your storytelling. So I would say when you're starting out, it's best to work with a script. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I think that you'll see people working from the same scripts. So you'll see an editor will have seen this same scene again and again and again and again because they've seen somebody draw it. So I think there's a middle ground there. Maybe have a script of something you wrote and maybe one that you didn't. Just because I just think that the learning how to, your ambition isn't really to draw for other writers necessarily. But I think 70% of artists, that's the job. So it's good to figure out what your problems are, work with those, work your problem solving brain, because I think writing to drawing is a different type of problem solving. But I do think it's important to
Is this an interview? I feel like I'm just talking now. But I do think there's definitely things you can hone that are good for you to know about yourself. But I think most people are coming at it differently than you are, and I totally see why you've done what you've done, and I think it probably has been the right call for you too.
Yeah, I definitely think people should take your advice rather than mine, given that you've had more success than I have. But I was always just copying other people anyway. When I was starting to post my work on social media, people like Junie Ba or Zoe Thorogood were coming up as well. And so I was just sort of copying what they were doing.
Where are they now, Colin? Where are they now?
They're so much more successful than I am. But, like you can never replicate someone's success. You can only just sort of like the things.
Well, look, even both those artists who write their own work too. They've broken in a wholly different way. They haven't broken in by Marvel or DC. They've both done a little bit of that stuff, but they've done they broke in being themselves, which is a very different way to do it. Like a harder way to do it, I would say. Not the way to break in necessarily, but to break in as your own kind of rounded creator is a very different way to just breaking in as like an art. I don't say art monkey. I don't mean it's disparaging way. I just mean somebody who's just got to do all the drawing.
Yeah, and I think,
and that's been what you want to do, really, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, like I think I always knew that I didn't have very many sort of big two ambitions, and that the perfect comics career to me was creator owned the whole way, and that the end point of that looks like, what Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips do, where it's just all creator owned work, and that's always what I wanted to do. So sort of copying what those people were doing was definitely felt like the right direction for me to go. But, hopefully one day it'll work out for me.
Here's hoping. Good luck with that. I'm quite confident it will. I think. We'll get onto it actually. So like the project I know you for is the Agency Case Files, which are a series of graphic novels you've put out through Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. What was the clincher for you to go, I'm gonna make my own story. and I'm not just gonna do, like, I'll tell people to do short stories, but you made I think a 60 or 80 page graphic novel, you put out through Kickstarter. What was the impetus for you to, one, make this story, and two, go the crowdfunding route? So
during lockdown, I first started the Agency Case Files in 2020. So that was the first year of lockdown. And in the years before that, I was pitching different books. I've always sort of been pitching something. And I was pitching stuff at the time, and it just wasn't getting picked up. And I was kind of like, I just sort of want to make something complete, And so I started the Agency Case Files, which originally was one of these pitches that I just figured I'd go ahead and finish up. And the idea always was that it would be sort of one and done detective stories. But I started them, and I was posting them online, I don't even know where I was selling them, but they were like €2 or something for each issue. And I had to have quite a bit of a talking to from a few friends to actually end up putting it on Kickstarter, because you see horror stories and everything, and it's sort of nerve-wracking to do your first Kickstarter. But it was like 2 years after I started that I decided to put it up on Kickstarter, and at that point there was a 144-page volume 1 and a 52-page holiday special, which I paid other writers to do out of my own pocket. And so I just decided to put it up on Kickstarter, so that way we could finally get a physical edition out in the world. And it did quite well at the time. And I was like, okay, I'll do some more of these. And even though they're not particularly financially successful, I don't really know what I'd be doing otherwise. I feel like it's good to sort of keep my head down and stay working on something. But this new volume 2, it's 180 pages, and it's going to be the last one for a little while, just because I've gotten busier with other work and everything. And it felt like a sort of good time to polish things off and stop it for now. And I've had a few people reaching out to me, saying that they're going to miss it. And it's grown a core audience over time, which is really nice to see as well, but in particular, I just wanted to get some actual work out there and into people's hands, which is the hardest part when you're approaching publishers, because a lot of the time it's going to be a no.
I mean, I do think it's hard for guys in your position, because publishers generally want to go with a known commodity, and even though you've clearly made a lot of material, unless people know that you've done like a monthly book, or you've worked within the system, like they're going to be a little gun shy. But I want to ask, what was the seeing to, or what was how you phrase it? What was the things that friends said to you that made you decide to go for it? Because I mean, you've done all the. I mean, I'm sure I was blue in the face telling you myself, but like, doing the work is so hard. It's the hardest part of it all, and you've done it. Beyond that, how did you get into people's hands? But from having met you, you're a very nice, affable fella, but you're not a big huckster. You're not a big massive like big personality that pushes yourself like crazy. What was the thing that was said to you by your friends that were like, okay, I'm gonna have to try this?
So I was working on a lot of anthologies with the Limit Break Comics guys, and Gary Maloney.
Just so people know that Limit Break are like a small press publisher in Ireland who do a lot of anthologies, and it's not just Irish creators they'll have, but they do these kind of annual anthology books and do crowdfunding for them and everything. Just so people know what Limit Break are.
I've got one on Kickstarter at the moment called Bump in the Night, which I'm not part of, but I worked a lot with Gary Maloney and Paul Carroll, and when I was doing the agency books, like I said, I was just putting them out online, and they would always say to me, you should do a Kickstarter, and they've done all their books through Kickstarter, and so I've always been kind of part of the Kickstarter process, even though I haven't run it myself.
Lurking, if you will.
Yeah. But they would always tell me that, and I had them come on board and work on the holiday special. And every single time I put out one of these, they'd always say, why isn't it on Kickstarter yet? And then I remember even talking to you at the time, and you basically said, what is there to lose by having it on Kickstarter? And I think, the thing that was stopping me was just seeing all the horror stories, of, this went wrong for so-and-so, or so-and-so ran off with all the money.
Well, there's like famous stories of people like, I think postage is a huge thing and people not delivering. And, actually I did a Kickstarter, and just today I got one sent back to me. So because the address clearly, I don't know, like it's a whole thing. It is. I mean, I think you know better than I because you've done such a good job with them. But there's pains that come with them and so many horror stories. So I totally understand like why you'd be worried.
Yeah, it's definitely a really stressful process, and even when you're quite well practiced at it, even like I am now, almost every day when I'm running one, I'm looking at the number, waiting for it to go up, wondering if this is going to be the one that doesn't pass the mark. But like you say, you have to do all the shipping and sort of, collecting people's addresses. And there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong, delays, stuff gets lost in the post or whatever. And so it's a very stressful
But you had,
process.
sorry, it was the holiday special was the first one you tried kickstarting, was it?
No, so it was volume 1.
Okay.
And the
But you had it all
special.
done at that stage, didn't you? It was
All complete, yeah.
So people didn't need to wait like a year for you to do it. You had it all pretty much
Nope,
done?
nope. So as soon as the Kickstarter was done, within the month, I had all the books sent out, printed and sent out.
That's
Um,
great.
and so like things couldn't have gone smoother, and even every Kickstarter I've done since then, I always have the book completely finished before I go in and do the Kickstarter, because I feel like I never want to be one of those Kickstarters where the book isn't finished and something comes up and there's a huge delay, and then years later you get your book. That's the last thing I want to happen.
Guilty as charged. Continue.
So I always have the book finished by the time I get there, which, is a tough thing to do, and not everyone can do it because, when I was doing those books, I was working a full-time job, and, I'd do them whenever I came home. So like, it's not always feasible for everybody, but I had, other income coming in while I was doing them. So I wasn't exactly losing anything. But I think that just the stress of it all was what made me not want to do it. And I just needed enough people to kick me in the arse to actually get me to do it, But everything's
so
smoothly.
being on the other side of that first campaign, then, I mean, clearly it's worth it because you've kept doing it since. Like, is there anything particularly surprising about it that you were like, oh, this is pretty cool? And was there anything else that we were like, oh God, I hate this more than anything else?
I think, when you start doing them, you realize you start seeing the same names coming up over and over again, and you realize, oh, there's an actual core audience built into this who are constantly showing up and buying the book. And as postage costs go up, you can totally understand why someone wouldn't want to pay for it, but you still see those same names. And so it's really nice to know that there is a core audience there who will pick up these books, who'll come to each Kickstarter, always buy the book regardless of how long it is or whatever, just because they love the stories. And that's such a great feeling, knowing that you actually have an audience, especially when, you're nebulously posting stuff on Twitter to nobody,
Yeah, like when you were doing the book, you just did not know if anyone was
reading it. Like whenever I put it up for sale, you'd see a couple people buy it, and most people don't read comics digitally. I don't anyway. And so it's nice to have a physical edition out there where, people will post pictures and say like, oh, I received this, or you'll see reviews posted online of it and everything. And that's a really, really great feeling. The bit of it I hate is getting the printed books back and having to lug them to the post office. It's about a half an hour walk from my house to the post office, carrying, something like 70 books or nearly 100 books, is a nightmare. But, that's all part of the process.
And would you, like, do you feel like you've learned certain tricks about like how to do, like, I mean, you're doing a campaign now. Did you make sure you're like, okay, I need to have certain amount of like teasers or graphics together, or I need to make a map of like when the book is coming out and when we're at the halfway point, and doing a count? Like, I do see people do great jobs of like constantly letting you know about it, because you just have to, don't you? You have to like, because you're what, the halfway point now, or past the halfway point?
So we are, there's 17 days left at time of recording this on the campaign. Just last night it got over the $2,000 mark of the 3,000 goal, so we're nearly there. But the last couple of campaigns we did, I had gotten a few different print artists to draw, teaser images for the book. They're on the wall behind me, getting, other artists have a built-in audience, and so getting them to understand what this book was, and they wanted to be part of it. You get a new audience coming in.
Did that? I mean, that's very smart. Did that work last time?
It worked out for the second campaign we did, and then the third campaign we did. I think it was just sort of a bad time for it. It didn't do great. It just eked past the funded mark on the final day, and so that was a really tough one. We're doing a lot better this time, but we don't have any of the prints or anything this time, just because the costs were going up and it wasn't sort of making enough to kind of warrant it. So this.
Should you have tried like just one or something, or?
So I think what I'm going to do is, if we get to the point of stretch goals, I'm going to have one there.
Makes sense.
That everyone will get as part of a stretch goal. But I think, last time we did a book called War Wounds, which is part of this Kickstarter as well. It's included in this volume. That it was just it was a heavy topic, a tough time in the world, and a lot of people kind of weren't that interested. And so it just didn't do great. There was a bunch of external factors as to why it didn't do great. But we're doing a lot better this time now, and the overhead costs are much lower on this volume. So, in theory, if we pass certain numbers, we'll be able to get some cool stuff there as well.
Do you think, learning those things like, print costs and paper, like you said this one's 180 pages. Would you not have thought 100? Is it be lighter to ship?
I'm just a sucker, and whenever I see a book, I'll always think, oh, it's longer. That means better,
Really? Okay.
It's not true at all.
I'm not sure that really pans out.
Not true at all. But I always feel like when I'm making something that I kind of want to give people value for money, even though, again, the notion's sort of ridiculous, but I like it when books are long. I've always felt that when I'm writing one of these stories that I'll write, it'll be as long as it needs to be, and I won't say
Fair
that,
enough.
hard cap on 22 pages, and I've always just felt that's the way to go. It just so happened that, the volumes we're collecting in this edition add up to 180 pages, but I mean, there's two main stories in this volume, and there was supposed to be a third, that was going to be graphic novel length, 100 pages. But I just decided to cut it since the last one didn't do well, so we've got what we've got now, and that's kind of
ideally you would do a third one down the line.
Yeah, that'd be nice. But I don't think it'll be for a while anyway.
Well, I'd like to get back to it because I'm curious. Might as well stick on it. So, in the last year, you've had a bit of a switch in your career doing work for hire stuff, and I will get into that. But I'm curious, has that changed anything now that you're coming back to doing another Kickstarter, essentially on the other side of having professional published work? Has anything changed, or is it exactly the same?
I would say nothing has changed that I've really noticed. What I sort of hope has changed is that there are people seeing my work in Terminator and Star Wars, and they're sort of looking at the creator-owned stuff, and there might be a new audience coming to it. But really nothing that I've super noticed. It feels almost identical to doing the last Kickstarter, and that's sort of weird,
Well, I wonder. Well, two things. I think that I do think people take you more seriously once you've done, say, Marvel, DC stuff, or just in general published work. When people know you've been paid, rather than it's just essentially a quote unquote hobby where you're putting out your own work. I do think there's a little bit of a that's what I'm looking for. Prestige that comes with somebody pays him for this, so it's worth buying.
Yeah.
But you're also very much still, you're still, your audience is still the same as what it was before because you're on a Kickstarter. There's one thing I think I learned doing the Kickstarters, a Kickstarter audience is a Kickstarter audience, a general audience is a general audience, and they don't necessarily mix.
Yeah, and it's obviously going to be the case, where if you've got a book picked up by Image or Dark Horse or whoever, and it's a direct market book, more people are going to read that than are going to read your Kickstarter book. And I think it's because of all those horror stories on Kickstarter that a lot of people are a little more reticent to back these things. And that's totally understandable. But yeah, that's the thing I really hope, is that maybe more people who have read this other work are coming to this now and seeing, there's a wealth of stuff here. I've had a few people reach out who know my work from the Oxventure D&D series online, who are coming in and picking up my comics work for the first time now, which is a great feeling to know that there's more people coming in. But I just sort of hope the same thing is happening with my comics work. But it is giving me, I think, more legitimacy sort of with editors and, people within the industry who can get you more work that way.
I do think if you were doing a new project as opposed to kind of like building up something you've already done, like, because, sequels to stuff is effectively diminishing returns. Like the first one is always the one that does better. Anything comes after doesn't do as well. Arguably, I think if you've done a new thing, maybe it would be different. But I mean, I also see that you've built up so much with the agency. You want to properly kind of package that together and give it its best kind of send off.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's sort of the reason that I've decided to cap it off for now, is because, like you say, it is diminishing returns. The longer something goes on, people fall off. That makes sense, so it just felt like a good time, especially getting other work actually in the industry. It felt like a good time to cap it off. The image that's on the screen at the moment is part of a new book I'm working on that I'm pitching around at the moment. If it doesn't get picked up, the first issue of it will go to Kickstarter.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I mean, it's it's a beautiful piece, man.
Thank you.
I mean, were I a commissioning editor, I'd like, just off the back of that image, I'd be like, "Ooh, what the hell is this?" It looks great.
I think I was reading the Reckless books, Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, and I love the way Sean Phillips paints his covers, and I was like, I want to do that. And so this is sort of my attempt at it in a sort of Western setting. I think it's just when you're pitching this to editors, different publishers, still, I think, I don't have enough kind of industry work to necessarily warrant them picking it up. I can understand why a publisher is
absolutely, but I mean, but everyone starts somewhere, like the people we mentioned earlier, Junie and Zoe and what have you, like they all started from zero and just got the right opportunity at the right time or said their stuff at the right time. It's just I've talked about it loads of times before, luck is so much part of it as well. I mean, talent is part of it. I was diminishing it earlier, but I mean, it's part of it. But timing goes so far, and you've just got to try and create your own opportunities as much as you can. And
absolutely. And I think that
there's one thing I have to say. I've always been impressed by you, is that you just keep at it, whereas I think other people would have just bailed by now.
I think that a lot of the time, trying to get your stuff published, it can feel like bashing your head against a wall. And a lot of the time, the solution isn't finding a way around the wall. It's having a thick enough skull, and I definitely think that I'm a stubborn enough person that I'm going to keep trying regardless, You
haven't given yourself a concussion just yet.
No, yeah, definitely.
Well,
I'm a real blockhead, so I'll get through it.
But it depends. You'll see some people's stuff and you're like, maybe you should not continue this, But I would never think that of your stuff. Like, I think it's just so strong and beautiful in a lot of cases. I do feel it's like, for you, perseverance will pay off. It's just, I wish I hadn't taken as long as it has, but I mean, clearly, like, this is the thing as well, like, you need to be able to handle this, otherwise, if you when you break in, arguably you have broken it, but like, this is a general point, not to you, but like, and you break in, like, it doesn't get easier. In some ways it's easier, but other ways it's harder,
and I mean, I saw there not too long ago that Chris Condon, who wrote That Texas Blood, he had a book rejected, and it still happens to people who have huge long careers and big successes behind them. It still happens, so, and everyone's different.
You have to learn to take it on the chin, and
and we always say, when when someone goes into the industry through a door, that door closes behind them forever. And it is very much the case. You can't replicate someone's success completely. You just sort of have to keep trying and keep going and doing.
You can. I think you can follow the echoes.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the direct way in for. I'm trying to think, like how Danny Earls did a year or so ago. Was a confluence of 5 different things, and it's never one thing. It's usually 3 or 4 things hitting at the right time. And if you're only doing one thing, then that's not going to get you very far. You have to be doing all these different things. And is that where you feel like you will have quote unquote made it, when you're pitching stuff you want to make and publishers go, cool, yeah, this is interesting, let's do this?
I think that'll be it. That'll be the made it point where I can sort of pitch any creator-owned book, and not even it getting picked up by any publisher, but I just sort of want to be the type of comics creator who, when I pitch a book, a publisher knows, oh, this is going to be something good. It can be finished. We can put it out, and that ideally there'll be an audience for. But I think until the first book actually comes out, we won't really know.
Well, so let's move on to that's lovely stuff, man. Move on to the work for hire stuff you're doing at the moment, and curious if, like, do you think that's that has opened up some doors, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Such as,
so now that I've been working on Terminator, and we're working with Nate Cosby, the editor, he'll come to me. I've been able to, I've colored Mark Bagley on a Silverhawks cover and a Thundercats Lost cover.
That's insane to me, man.
Yeah, and he just offered me something recently that he wanted me to draw and color that I unfortunately had to turn down. But so like there's stuff there, and I'm hoping that what that means is, editors will realize I'm good for it, and that I can deliver something and I can deliver it on time, which I think is like really, really crucial, is being able to deliver something high quality and on time. And even working with Dark Horse on the Star Wars book, that I'm hoping that I was just talking to Spencer recently about maybe doing something again. And so I'm hoping that opens more doors for me later on down the line, and ideally all these things will open up a creator-owned door for me eventually, that I'll be able to get something in there,
So, I mean, I do think, like, the creator-owned stuff you've done, it definitely has, because, like, that's what I got to know, and that's why I thought of you for Terminator. So if anybody doesn't know, Colin is the colorist on Terminator, and you've also you drew the story that his name just fell out of my head.
Sal Crivelli.
Sal Crivelli, yeah. I did the backup for the first series, and you just finished, in fact, an issue for the second volume that I wrote, which is great. When Terminator's coming up, I thought of you just because I knew, like, Nate will have his own stable of people that he knows and trusts, but I also, like, the benefit of writing for me is getting to, like, if I can get opportunities to some people. A lot of Irish people, but I'd say now I'm biased against Irish people. Enough Irish people at this stage now. Only looking at foreigners, but I'd seen you put so much work into everything you've done for ages, and I knew that, like, it might be hard getting you on as an artist, but if you knew I was such a big fan of your color work, I figured, we could probably get you on as a colorist and then kind of like slip you in the back door, if I'm being honest. Which worked. Doesn't always work, but it actually did in this case. You did such wonderful work on Luke's issue, and when the backups came up, I suggested you, and that just worked out great. So straight away, you were before I was expecting it to happen, you ended up, like, drawing and coloring, and that was the one thing as well, because you didn't just draw it, you were coloring it as well, which is more your work rather than having somebody else color you. So what was it like to get that first short then? Yeah, that's with the colors later. I'm curious, like to get to draw like a contained story for a publisher. Like, was that cool?
It was really cool. Yeah.
Stupid question.
When you asked me to come on board for Terminator, you initially asked me would I be interested in being an artist for it, and I drew a little teaser image. It just so happened that I didn't, and I was the colorist on it. But it was really nice to sort of, in a kind of roundabout way, end up drawing it anyway. And I always knew. I remember when you pitched the series to me that you said even regardless I would be drawing an issue later of it, and so I always knew that was coming, that I would be drawing an issue of it regardless. And it was nice that it happened actually sooner than I think anyone was thinking,
pretty much immediately.
And I feel like, as an artist, you feel like you're growing all the time, and even now, having just finished issue 8, I think the pages are so much stronger than what they were originally, in the short story we did with Sal. And that's not to diminish that short story at all, but it's really nice being able to look back and see that the work has improved even as of that recently. But no, the short story was really, really fun. It was great working with Sal. And like I even said before about having a built-in audience, Sal has a huge, huge built-in audience who will always sort of come out and support his stuff. And it was nice even seeing people follow me on social media, having, seen the work show up on Sal's channel, which was really, really nice.
That's great. I'd forgotten about that, actually. That must have gotten way more eyeballs on your stuff than before.
Yeah, absolutely. I was seeing, when the first issue came out, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, it's kind of strange to have a 2-page sort of short story at the end of it." But the reception to it was very positive. And after that first issue came out, and Sal was promoting it on his own channel, I just was seeing a lot of people follow me on social media, which was really nice. And I've seen a lot of people review the books purely because they knew who he was, and that cottoned them onto it in the first place. So it is nice that someone else can come along with that built-in audience as well.
And so was it? I mean, I know you've worked on other people's stories before, and it was, it wasn't very long. It was like 10 pages. So, to say, like, what was it like working on a big story like that? I mean, it wasn't huge, but like, was it a challenge in any new way?
I think it definitely, from a drawing perspective, having to draw T800s all the time, that's definitely a challenge. But I would say I probably approached it very similar to how I've approached every bit of comics work I've had. I think that, I was very prepared, having done the agency books all the time, that, I know about visuals, sequential language and stuff like that. So, and when he sent the script to me, it felt very much like all the scripts I'd been writing, so like I feel like I was kind of uniquely quite prepared to do it.
So you do write scripts for yourself. You don't just like, do it as you draw.
No, yeah. So I always write the script beforehand, and I am a meticulous plotter. I have reams of notes on everything I write. So half the time, the amount of notes I have, the script is basically already written before I get to a script. But I've always, I think Jim Zub shared some of his scripts online before, and I use a lot of those as kind of basis of how comic writing format is. I know some people write in screenplay format, but the way when Sal sent his script to me, when I'd seen your script for issue 1, it was very similar to the way I was writing my own stuff. So I did feel very uniquely kind of prepared to actually do it.
I'm curious because I think my scripts are fairly lean. Like, I think I was looking, like, I worked with Jeff Parker, who is an artist as well as a writer. Same with Brian Wood, and and I think I liked their scripts a lot because I don't want to get tired while I'm reading a script.
Yeah.
Like I want to kind of keep moving along and seeing the images rather than just like reading blocks of text.
Yeah.
So I think that got into my head fairly early on. And Warren Ellis's scripts are actually surprisingly, like I was expecting them to be very verbose and, highfalutin, but they were actually, he kind of writes like a cartoonist, to be honest.
Yeah.
So it's great. I think reading other people's scripts is a great way to learn about how you want to do them, how you don't want to do them. I just did like 2 pages for an X-Men anthology issue, and it was really hard. I haven't worked from anybody's script in years. And it was with Alex Packnadell, and his formatting is different to mine.
Yeah.
So it's not a slight on Alex at all. It's just the way my brain works. It was hard to kind of
But I think
work
that's
around
the
that
thing
again.
as well, is that like there's no kind of set way you should do things when you're working in any part of this medium, that everyone has just sort of figured out what way they do stuff. There's no kind of textbook you can learn from that this is how everything should be done. So everyone's sort of figured it out on their own.
Yeah, actually, I think I'm pretty sure that when I was writing Deadpool vs. Old Man Logan, the editor Jordan White, now I don't know if it was about me, but he was complaining about how writers not formatting scripts. And I was reading, I saw him tweeting about it, and I was like, so no one had told me how to format a script. I just kind of wrote it the best, like now I do, but I was probably 3 scripts in at that stage. I had to figure out what I was doing. Like a lot of it, you're just learning on the job.
Yeah, there's the great Mike Mignola documentary where Jason Shawn Alexander talks about how the way he draws stuff drives Mike Mignola crazy, because he expects things to be done, layouts, pencils, inks, colors, letters, that very sort of structured format. And, Jason Shawn Alexander, he does not do things that way, and it can drive people nuts.
Yeah, or even I think I'm used to handing in like sets of pages. Like I'll hand in maybe 5 or 10 pages of pencils, and then I'll link them. Whereas Drew and who else? I think a lot of people in that, or Drew and Andrea. What's his name? On Alien, Andrea Briccardo, would hand in pencils, like a page of pencils, each day. And to me, like I find that a bit hard to keep track of it. Also, Drew doesn't work chronologically, so sometimes he sends a page and I haven't a clue what's happening, even though I wrote the thing, because he did page 2 and I was doing page 17. So I'm like, I didn't have to open up a script. I find that frustrating, and I'm not complaining. Don't get me wrong. Like, the way the artist works, I think, is more important because it is way more time consuming. Yeah, I just find it hard from a writing point of view, where I have to constantly go back and reference something I wrote. Whereas, like when I'm working on something, I have a very set idea of like the shape of it, where this is, where that is. I've never understood artists who don't work chronologically, but like
I'm the exact same.
Listen, you work chronologically?
I always work chronologically. On Terminator issue 8, we did the last pages first and then did everything else afterwards. And that was sort of a weird way of working for me. When
it was weird for me too, but I knew like this is the tough stuff to draw. Yeah, because like I think one of my strengths is, and maybe it's a weakness too, but like I think I just wrote a script for Joe, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be a lot of work, but this will be a little bit easier. So hopefully that'll balance things out. And I was trying to think that way to you, like rather than give you the easy stuff first, I don't know what your deadline is. I felt it was more responsible to get the more work intensive stuff done. So at least, you don't have to rush that. It's kind of hard to talk around like the plot of the issue we did, but like, it's not the ideal way for it to work. But again, I'm very practically minded because I've drawn comics for years, and I know how hard it is to get this stuff done.
Yeah, and usually the way I would do my own stuff is that I would finish a page in its entirety, pencil, ink, color, letters in its entirety before moving on to the next thing. I've never been the type of person.
Colors as well.
Colors as well, yeah. So I've never been the type of person who would draw 22 pages of pencils and then go back and do inks, that would feel like quite a weird way of working to me.
Well, it's how I work, but I wouldn't do 22 pages. I'd do like 10. And I find by the time I'm going back and I'm inking the pencils, I'm catching stuff that looks off, like a weird hand, or because the way I couldn't work the way you work is because I'm too close to it.
Yeah.
So I'd find it very hard to catch something that looks wrong. And then by the time I'd notice it, it'd be colored and finished and everything. So I use the process of inking pencils to kind of fine tune drawings or catch stuff that maybe I just, sometimes just things don't work. Or you drew something, it's fine. Then you look at it later, like, what the hell is that? Yeah. And same with colors. Like, I need to line up my colors, so I can't shift around my process because the momentum gets lost. So I can color maybe 4 pages in a day, 5 if I was doing great. But like, I couldn't pencil and then ink and then flat and then color a page a day. No way. I just no, I'd be disaster. So I don't understand how you can do that.
I think that like we said before, everyone has their own way of how they've figured out how to do things, and I feel like I'm very much a sort of a big picture kind of person, in a way that I feel like I need to know what the final page is going to look like to get an idea of the whole book. So that's always how I figured out how to do things, is finish the page in its entirety, in its final form, and then move on to the next, But again, I know that seems probably a bit psychotic to most people.
But weirdly, like I said, other stuff seems psychotic that you and I would agree, and then other stuff clearly it just works a different way. I find that it's kind of mad. I will say I was surprised how good your inks were on the issue we just did. So we just finished issue 8. Yeah. So that's all done now. But like, because you color yourself, I wouldn't have been surprised if it was like a little bit if the inks were a bit patchy, because you want to color it, so you don't need to, like, I don't know, you can just feck in a background or something like that. But I was really surprised. Your inks are actually like fully developed inked pages.
Thank you.
Like I wasn't expecting that. I was kind of expecting more like main figures inked with like background stuff kind of just lightly patched in. But no, it was like I felt like you could have given that to a colorist and then they would have to color it.
Yeah, I've always sort of, it's weird to say, I draw completely digitally, so everything I do is digital. But I've always at least tried to somewhat replicate a traditional process, so when I'm doing, I think when a lot of people see my work, especially when it's all colored, they probably think a lot of it is being done in the colors. But I've always felt that I need to have high quality inks there as well, and that at certain points in the process, you can make things easier for yourself later in the process. And it's part of the reason I think everyone should have a good idea of kind of every bit of making a comic,
Sure.
That you should have some idea of what a colorist has to do, what a letterer has to do, because it gives you a good sort of inclination as to how best to work your inks, but I've always sort of tried to replicate that traditional process where, what if I was drawing a page traditionally and then scanning it in, there's certain things I'd want to be in place before I get to colors, and that's how I've always kind of approached it.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I think it's the best way. I definitely think I'm a better penciler because I used to letter my own stuff. And I think I'm a better artist because I know how to color my own stuff now, just even learning the basic process of the other disciplines makes you better at the one thing. If there is one thing that you feel like, even writing, the same thing. I learned how to write through drawing, basically.
Absolutely.
It's all beneficial.
At the end of the day, you don't have to be a world-class letterer to, understand that understand the process of lettering and know that you should fill your frame in a way that leaves space for lettering, and all these other little bits.
Like if that head was just over to the right more, I could have fit this caption in. Things like just small little things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Now let's get into the real mean part of the podcast, where we review every artist who's worked on Terminator.
Okay.
I'm curious, because I actually meant to ask you about this last time we talked, but I don't consider you a colorist per se. I like to think of you as a cinematographer, and I actually do mean that, despite how wanky it sounds, because you're not a colorist per se. You color your own work. I do think there's a distinction between somebody who colors other people's work and only colors their own. But with doing a licensed book like Terminator, I was worried that what might end up happening is you just end up with some kind of bog standard colorists that would make everything look like it's just sheen and glossy and stuff like this. And this, I was going for a certain aesthetic on this book, which is why, I asked for the artist that I asked for. I asked for you. But I knew without you even drawing it, your approach to color would put way more mood and atmosphere to the book, and would create even though there's different artists on it, it would create a certain aesthetic that, it's not replicating the movie necessarily, but it's still identifiable. And I've said it, I think I said it in my newsletter the other day or something, or maybe publicly, but I think you were the secret weapon of this book. So I'm glad you got to draw some of it too, because, all the more reason, but you've stitched together everything so well, where each artist is spotlighted in a great way, while also keeping this book feeling like it's the book that it is. I love when you pick up a book and you know what the book is.
Yeah.
Okay, Hellboy is probably a bad example because it's so stylized, but when you sometimes you pick up I don't know, the example I used years ago was Hawkeye. Fraction of an Eye is Hawkeye. When you open that book, it has a feel to it, and that's something I'm always trying to do with anything I work on, and it's harder when you're not doing it yourself, which is why I thought someone like you would come to it that way. So yeah, I was curious, how did you approach? Because it was just Luke originally. That's all you knew you were going to be working on. What were you thinking going in as regards coloring somebody else?
So I would say, just you mentioning that I would be more of a cinematographer, but I have always approached making comics with filmic inspiration. And, I think when a lot of people hear that, they probably say, oh, here we go, because there's quite a lot of comics
Cinematic
out there.
Influences.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of comics out there that are just shameless pitches to be picked up and, adapted. And that's not exactly respectful to the medium of comics. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't inspired by film in any way, because I studied film in college. Second to comics, film is one of my great loves in life. And I think, there's Alan Moore has a book called Alan Moore's Writing for Comics, and he talks about
great title.
Yeah, and he talks about how comics are in sort of a unique position where they can benefit from both the strengths of literature, the written medium, and the visual elements of film, and not really have any of the weaknesses of both of those things. And I've always sort of applied that to my own work, that there's a lot you can learn from film and the great cinematographers of film, your Roger Deakins and your Greg Frasers and people like that. There's a way they compose things and there's a way they light things that you can apply very easily to comics. And I've also been influenced in huge ways by, comics people also, because comics is my great love in life. And, the reason I use a lot of texture and stuff like that is because I saw Matt Hollingsworth doing it years ago on Sean Murphy's work. And Matt Hollingsworth had tutorials and everything on how to add texture into your work. And so I always took that with me, and, using gradient maps and stuff like that to sort of create a tone. But when I got asked when you asked me to do Terminator, I only knew at the time that I'd be working on Luke, but I was kind of not super confident in my own abilities as a colorist, because I'd only really ever colored myself. And occasionally, Chris Somney would post an image on Twitter and I'd color it up for fun or whatever. And that would be about as far as I'd go. But when you asked me to do this, I was sort of like, oh, I don't know if I'm a great colorist or not. But, I just sort of, when I went in, I was like, I'll just color Luke's work the exact same way I'd color my own, and we'll see how it comes out. I sort of like not being fully in control of color and everything like that. I'm a very feel it out kind of artist, in a weird way, and I can understand that would be frustrating to a lot of people. But when I get a page, I'll sort of play with gradient maps or different brushes and textures and colors, and I would say my color theory isn't the best, but I just sort of feel things out as I go along, and I think like this page we have on screen is a good example of it, where there's just I think texture is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, because the colors are really quite basic. It's very flat,
but also Luke's work was very, very detailed. Like,
exactly,
he had washes, he had all of the kind of value work was already there. So it really just needed, arguably could just be paint by numbers here because so much of the heavy lifting was done by him.
Absolutely.
In this page specifically, still, there's a lot to be said for not fucking up someone's stuff.
Yeah.
So there wasn't so loads for you to do, but I liked that your textures backed up his because he had a lot of textures in his work. Your textures, they backed it up without kind of overwhelming it, and you knew to not. For me, it was like knowing what not to do as opposed to you doing all this mad stuff. And if I recall, I think I asked you to bump up the red on the eye in this one.
Yeah.
So for me, it was I had a good sense of you'd have some good choices, but I don't even think I do it anymore, but at the start, I think I might have just asked you to bump. I think that was my thing, is bump up the red here, bump up the red here.
Yeah.
I think that was my only note.
I think when we started it, definitely the original version of the pages was maybe a little kind of too unified in terms of color. I think I was going for a lot of kind of gold and purpley sort of look, and definitely I think everyone sort of thought it would be kind of more naturalistic color, and so we went for that in the end. But there is a lot to be said for having restraint when it comes to doing colors. And especially it's a little daunting when you get anybody's pages that aren't your own, because you're like, oh, I don't want to screw up someone else's work. It's fine if I screw up my own work, but I don't want to screw up anyone else's. But
there's some artists who are so open that you can go in and do too much stuff too. But Luke's stuff is so layered and textured and very fully fleshed. So it would be very easy to go in and just try and do stuff to it that would detract from what you're doing. So less is more, I would say. But there was so much lovely, you said it was a Matt Hollingsworth video. Was it? I'm going to have to look at that because I love the texture stuff you do. And I emailed you a while ago going, what text? Do you have textures? And you're like, yeah, I just made them myself. I was like, son of a bitch, because I just feel my text. I'm not. I think I'd like to use texture more in my color, but I don't really know what I'm doing.
Yeah, I don't even know if he
you were no help to me at all.
We've got to keep our secrets. He used to have a YouTube channel that
I remember.
He would post all these tutorials on, and he would say, he would say, I made this texture, because I threw some paint at a wall, and now that's my texture. I'm just going to take a picture of it and add it in. And I do think there is a sort of tangible physical experience to reading a comic, and especially holding it in your hand, and I've been very lucky where I've had a few kind of artistic epiphanies in my life, but definitely seeing Matt Hollingsworth over Sean Murphy on The Wake, there's such a lovely sense of texture in that book, and where even if you were reading it digitally, it would feel almost like it's something you could touch and hold.
Sure. If I recall, was it The Wake or was it maybe Tokyo Ghost? But I think a lot of Japanese printmaking was a big inspiration. That kind of
Yeah.
woodblock texture and stuff was a big thing at the time, if I recall.
Yeah, definitely on that probably would have been Tokyo Ghost, but on the
Mm.
Wake, uh, he was using a lot of like it looked like it scanned paper, sort of look. And I've always felt that I really love watercolors, especially reading Black Sad, where Juanjo Garnido has like these gorgeous, gorgeous watercolored pages that are unlike anything you've ever seen before. And I've always sort of wanted to go for kind of a watercolored look, but I also love like dry media or splattery sort of brushes. And I figure, just kind of use everything. There's no rules, you can just sort of figure everything out as you go. And that's what I mean by kind of feeling things out, I always think that definitely a flat but textured approach is better than rendering everything into the ground. Like not everything needs to have that sort of glossy rendered look. And that's how I've approached sort of every artist who's worked on Terminator, is just flat but textured, and occasionally, like some people will prefer when their stuff is a bit more zhuzhed up. And, so like I did a lot of that kind of extra rendering on Luke's work. But whereas someone like Joe Mulvey kind of benefits from being colored mostly flat, in my opinion, but yeah, no, it's very much a feel it out sort of process.
Well, I mean, but that's why I was so happy with this when this issue came out, because I'm like this is the big reveal of Terminator in issue 1. I'm like, but I feel like this doesn't look like, this looks more interesting than just like what if you imagine a Terminator comic book is going to look like. This feels grounded and moody, and feels like a horror film as opposed to a big action shot. I was just so happy with this first issue. I think it's one of the best things I've gotten to work on, both because of what Luke did and how you accentuated what Luke was doing. You didn't work against him. You didn't try to push it too much either. You just let all his strengths kind of be on the page and bump them up with some just like like you said, just like some nice textures, push things back, other stuff push forward. Just it was so nice. On Dave O'Sullivan, do you, if you have any pages from the Vietnam story here, or is it just this is the issue that's coming out?
Yes, this is issue 7.
Yeah, when this episode comes out, I think it'll be out next week. It was set in a concentration camp. I was very adamant about it. I mean, I'd say you actually put more work into it than I even wanted you to. I wanted it to be like as stark as possible, and then like you did all these beautiful like cloud effects. I was like, oh, it's lovely. It's really nice. Is that all texture as well, or did you paint that in?
It is, yeah. So a lot of those cloud layers are all painted. I've never been particularly good at painting clouds, and it was something, especially working on the Western book I'm doing now. You see a lot of great Western painting, and it's you see these huge clouds, and I really wanted to get really good at painting skies, and so that's what a lot of this is just sort of. It's very simple. It's just kind of cloudy. But Dave has done such a good job with all his washes and everything here that like a lot of the characters I've colored pretty much flat. But just being able to have a slightly kind of painted, textured background, so that way the snow and everything in the foreground shows up a bit better. So like I didn't want to go too nuts on it. But just sort of
it gelled really, really nicely. Like I wanted him to draw things in a stark way, and I wanted you to color things in a stark way, and he both like melded quite nicely. But was this very different to when you did the Vietnam story with Dave? Because he didn't have washes in that one. I knew with this one he wanted to like really flesh things out more and have a more of a kind of a painterly feel.
Yeah. So when we did the Vietnam story, I was doing a lot more rendering on his work, just to sort of give it a bit more depth and everything. But I definitely think, that him doing the washes and everything on this issue, like, really, really benefited his work. Also saved me a lot of time because I could mostly color things flat as well.
Well, you do like that was one thing that got me because Luke has washes. Joe doesn't though, and you made it look like he did have washes. I'm trying to find. I'll get to Lorenzo a bit. I don't know if there's a good example here, but like that painterly effect on the Earth on the horizon there, that kind of looks like it might have been done in washes, but no, that was you. That was all you in color. Some of the shade, actually, I think on the spaceship there's like some shading in the last panel. That wasn't in the line art. That was you, but it looks like there's a nice little kind of like a wash just put down on the side. Like, how are you getting that watercolor effect?
So I use Adobe's own homemade watercolor brushes, and that's what I'll use a lot of. But when I'm coloring this, I'm just using black and white brushes at like 50% opacity for rendering. So that way it does make it look like the artist did this rather than a colorist, because there is sort of kind of a subtle little dance you have to do between yourself as a colorist and what the artist is doing as well. And you don't want your coloring to be like in your face. You want it to feel like it's all part of the one unified image, and that the artist at any one time could have done this themselves, and so that's always how I've kind of approached everyone's work on Terminator, is that you just want it to be gelled together.
I was very, because I'm so happy with how this issue looked, because I'm similar to what you said about Joe earlier. Like, I've also seen a lot of his stuff, because he kind of like has some bombastic stuff. I feel that like I've seen him colored very gradients and highlights, and every little bit of highlight kind of popped, it works on his stuff for sure. But I just kind of felt like it's too much. But I felt like you would do something a lot more restrained with like some nice color choices. So even this, where the rocket's taking off, you've got these like you've got pink in the sky, lovely, great choice. But the rocket itself, you've just got a little bit of kind of an ink stained wash on it, but there's not, it's colored for sure, but it's just not like overly done. And I feel like his because a lot of his line work is very shape based, less you can actually see the line more, whereas if you're just like chugging rendering on top of it, I think it makes it look like, I don't know, I think it has a worse effect on his stuff. But that was just me, but I hadn't seen anybody do it before. And when you did it, I'm like, oh, this is perfect.
I think for my personal taste, I've never really liked that style of sort of very rendered coloring. You see it a lot on sort of
the 90s style, or
90s style, early 2000s stuff. A lot of even the kind of house style of Marvel and DC, they still have that sort of look. But I've always liked things that are kind of a bit flatter, and I think it's because I love Mike Mignola and how he was colored by Mark Chiarello on Seed of Destruction and everything, and I've always loved that sort of flat but very kind of bright poppy colors look. And I've always thought, especially working on this book, how would I like to be colored? And I suppose that's one of the benefits of being an artist myself and working as a colorist on this book, is that I know how I like to be colored. I might as well color everyone kind of how I would like to be colored. At least then they can tell me, oh, we can do a bit more here or there, but thankfully everyone's liked it so far.
I was never like hoping you would be this kind of amazing chameleon that would just like change for everybody's work. Like I said, like I think it's not as obvious, but like you look, I'm looking forward to getting the trade because I can just look over the whole thing, but I feel it'll be more cohesive, despite the different artists. Because you clearly do have to adjust. You're not going to color everybody the same way, but the same eye, I think, has a kind of a more consistent feel. I was expecting everything to look so different, but I was more curious about Joe's because I hadn't seen him colored that way before. I guess Luke is different. Who colored Luke? I worked with Luke once, and he kind of did a nice job, kind of similar. It was like less is more. So I kind of knew what I was hoping to see there. But yeah, Joe is a totally other kettle of fish. I have to say, Matt, when I got saw the colors for Lorenzo Rey's issues. Well, sorry, this is issue 6. Let me move to So this is the first issue you did together, which was issue 4. And he did really nice kind of implied backgrounds. Like he'd have backgrounds, but then a lot of like texture.
Yeah.
And I love that like you two really balanced each other. Like I think you really ramped up the texture for this one because he had so much texture in his work. Or am I wrong?
Yeah. So I used I would say when we did issue 6, I used maybe more texture than I did here. But he does this really nice sort of almost grainy looking sort of gradient background on a lot of his
that's
stuff.
right. Sorry, I forgot that was him, not you. Yeah.
So that was his own work. But occasionally, like the third panel on that page, there was no background on it at all. And so, it's nice just to add in a bit more texture. I was using like dry media brushes in the background and stuff, just to kind of give it a crunchier sort of feel. When we got to issue 6, I was using a lot of splatter brushes and everything just to sort of make things feel chaotic.
This is different. Yeah, this is set in a submarine, like whereas when we were doing issue 6. It's different. It's all set in the future. It's all like destroyed buildings and like dystopia and whatnot. Like I can see you using a very heavy splatter in the sky there, which it's way more heavy-handed than you normally would do. I think that was my thing as well. It was like I always tried to make sure, I was supporting your choices, because you're doing so much good stuff that like, there might be something I wouldn't expect, but I had to go like, oh, actually, that's an interesting choice. And interesting choices is why I wanted you on the book. Yeah,
and I've never felt like particularly precious about my work either. Like I said, I very much feel things out, and I'm very understanding if someone would say to me, oh, I don't really like how that looks. Can we do something different? Just because I haven't really gone in with a plan. I'm not thinking about, what's my color palette going to be? I don't work in swatches or anything like that. So, I just sort of experiment with stuff. And I ended up really liking how a lot of these splatter textures and stuff came out because, it's the future war and it should be sort of chaotic. But and especially this page I really love.
I love this one, yeah.
And Lorenzo's work is really, really great in this whole issue. But I was playing around with a lot of splatter brushes and stuff on this. And he would do that sort of thing on his own work. Even in that third panel, you can see a lot of the sort of black splatters or things he's done himself, and so I feel like I just sort of pick up on things that an artist is doing and then kind of add to it, because I think you should be additive rather than kind of, sort of being really in your face, if that makes sense.
No, sure. This was issue 6 and you were surprising me again still, I just I love this issue. It came out so cool. And you're right, like I just think your instincts have always been on the money. And I think like I think I ever have like 1 or 2 notes an issue. I can't even remember what I might have had on this one. But it's generally just like, can we push this a bit more, or could maybe this be a different color? Tiny little things like that. Like, there's so much.
It's been a very satisfying working experience, I think, working on this, even though it's kind of, it can be quite tough. But I think that I'm really happy with how each issue has come out, and I'm really happy that everyone also seems happy with it as well. That like I have had very few notes when it comes to things, like I was sort of expecting when we did issue 8 that drawing it for myself and everything, that there would be way more notes, but there was barely any, and so it seems everyone is really happy with how things have come out, and that's quite a satisfying working experience.
Having done a whole issue yourself now, so like the story with Sal was 10 pages, this is like 22, and it is it's a weird, but like I definitely had a very specific idea for this, that I think only you could have really pulled off the way we pulled it off. But like, how does it feel to have like done like a whole story? It's probably the longest thing you've done since like outside of your agency stuff.
It definitely is, yeah. Because when we did the Star Wars story, it was only 8 pages. So this is the first time I've done a full issue on like in an actual, direct market book. But no, it was really, really satisfying, and I was sort of worried when we started it that I was kind of like, oh, I feel like I need way more time than I actually have, or, whatever, the kind of self-confidence stuff everyone goes through when they start something like this. But everything just worked out really well. I was really happy, even with, the script gave me lots of room to play around, and that's kind of always what you want, is something, at least it's what I want, is that things are detailed enough in the script to give you good direction, but also sort of, give you enough room to play around and experiment with things, which is kind of what I like to do. Even like I said before, is how I just sort of feel things out. But no, it was.
Well,
it was
I'm
really
glad
good.
you've caught on to the point of this podcast, Colin, which is where I get a compliment, or I find a compliment
you
for
spent the whole
myself.
time complimenting me, so it's only fair.
Well, I mean, I'm. It's not even a subversive thing, but no, I am glad to hear that. Like, that's the. I feel like that's when I get to do my best stuff, is when, like, I don't want no direction, because
Yeah.
no direction actually doesn't help. I want some direction, but I don't want so much direction where I feel like I'm too contained.
Yeah, there's
So
definitely a balance to be struck.
yeah, you don't want to be the writer that you would hate to work with. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's what I'm always hoping, is whoever I'm working with, there's. I think Warren specifically was really good at that. Where if there's something specific, it was there in the script, very much so, and very much explained. But otherwise, there was so much flexibility that like it never, like, if there's a very specific thing you're going for, sure, fine, no problem. I'm happy to do that,
Yeah.
as long as like I don't feel like you're over my shoulder art directing me the whole time. I seem to get a lot of questions when I talk about like writing and drawing, that people seem to think that like, you're the one making all the shots, or you're the person who's like telling everyone what to do. And I'm like, I like the control freak aspect of that, but like I'd hate to work with that guy.
Yeah.
I try and just think of the overall. Sorry, Colin. So is it?
It's never you versus the artist.
Yeah.
You should kind of be working in harmony.
Yeah, I think if I can be like, this is the target I'm going for, and what the target is, then it might deviate a little bit, but as long as we're going to the same place, I'm generally always really happy. Like, and do you think, did you learn anything doing this whole issue yourself?
I always sort of, I feel like progress a lot of the time, when you're making progress as an artist, it can sort of feel invisible a lot of the time. You don't really think like, oh, I'm making progress now. I'm a better artist now. But like I said earlier, that when I looked back at the pages I did with Sal for the backup story, I feel like the pages for issue 8 are so much stronger than what I was capable of even then. So it's really nice to be able to see that kind of progress on the same book,
But I think that it's something that doesn't really, you don't think about it that much, because like you've worked on like an 80-page project, or 100, like you've done lots of longer stuff, and you've done some shorter stuff. I do think there's something about the 20-something page comic, because it's long enough to be a lot of work, and it's short enough to not take a year.
Yeah,
you can really hone a lot of things. You can work a lot of stuff out in a relatively short space of time, like a month and a half, 2 months, whatever it is. And when it's done, you can draw a line under it, and then you move on to the next thing. I think it's why, like, I think Luke had that experience with the first issue. Because I remember talking about the time, like getting to do a full 20-page something comic, you level up after it. And like seeing what he's doing on issue 10 now, boy, is he leveled up,
absolutely.
But I think, if you do a 60-page project, you kind of, I don't say you level out. It's just I think for an artist, it's good to have like um, points where you just stop, take a breath, and push for further. You know,
Yeah.
like doing a few sprints as opposed to one long marathon. I think it kind of hones you a lot faster, and I don't think, because you haven't gotten to do that yet. I wonder, is that going to affect what you do next?
I hope so. You know, when we were doing this issue, I knew that I sort of, when I was doing a lot of my ink work, I was like, oh, I sort of want to incorporate a lot of those dry media and splatter brushes into my ink work rather than just in the color. And so I was very satisfied with how the inks came out for this one. But at the same time, I knew that I sort of wanted to do almost a sort of non-literal kind of color scheme for it, which I hadn't been doing a huge amount in this. I've done a little bit in my own stuff, but I've sort of, for this, I've kind of mostly kept things kind of naturalistic colors. But I sort of wanted to play around with color palettes and stuff more in this issue. And I think, you know, the sort of colors of this issue I'm particularly proud of.
That's great, man. I'm glad to hear it. I don't want to keep you much longer, but I do want to ask, now with that's done and you're moving back over to Kickstarter to do this next agency book, what are you thinking next? Like, or I guess I kind of asked earlier on, but like, has your approach changed since, now that you've done, like, let's just say about a year of professional work? To go back to your creator own, like, has much changed with your approach, and have your career goals changed since?
So I always feel like I take a little bit from everyone I work with, or if I see like an artist doing one thing on a book and I can say, oh, I like that, I'll use that in my own stuff. I've definitely done a lot of that working with everyone on Terminator, and I've brought that into my own stuff. And especially I've learned a lot about, you know, coloring other people's stuff and things like that, and little bits that I want to bring into my own work. But I would say, by and large, the sort of career goal of ultimately wanting to make creator-owned stuff hasn't really changed. I'm always happy to work with people or work on certain things. You know, I'll always take on work if it's offered to me. You know, I'm always happy to do that. But I think part of me longs to, you know, make comics by myself as well, to a degree, and I'm glad that I can do that at the same time as working on this. A lot of the stuff for this Kickstarter, this volume of the agency, has already been completed, so I haven't really done much new on it. But I'm really looking forward to the next thing. And if it's the Western book that I'm working on, that'd be great. If it's something else, I was just thinking this morning about what am I going to do next. And I've always got that sort of in the back of my head, you know, because I like the idea of constantly having my head down, constantly working on something. I don't like sitting idle for very long. So I'm looking forward to what comes next myself. And I'm glad that I've had the opportunity to work on Terminator and work with so many great artists, you know, because I think in the long run it will make me a better artist. And I'm hopeful that, you know, there'll be a lot more of me to come.
That's great, man. I've one last question for you. Outside of your issue, what's your favorite issue of Terminator?
Picking favorites. I really liked issue 6.
That's the second Lorenzo one.
That's the second Lorenzo one. It
The
was
one up here, yeah.
That's the one on screen, yeah. It was the first time we really got to do a lot of the Future War stuff. And I've never been, you know, it might be sacrilege to say this, but I've never particularly been a Terminator fan, but I've always understood the kind of iconography of the characters. But this issue, I think, was the point where I sort of became quite confident with the colors, and sort of working in harmony, like I was saying before, with the other artists as well. I think this is some of the best color work I've done on the series, and I'm really, really satisfied with the issue. But as on the whole, I think that every artist on the series has been fantastic.
No. You said Lorenzo. It's fine.
I said Lorenzo.
I thought that would be harder to get out of you. I thought you'd be like, no, I couldn't possibly choose. But you're like, straight away, issue 6. I didn't even have to. So take that, everybody else. That's what Colin really thinks of you. That's fine. Well, look, man. Look, best of luck with the Kickstarter. We'll stick a link. The episode below. I think by the time this episode comes out, it'll be a few days before the end of it. So hopefully we can kind of get you over the. Okay, I hope we can get you over the line if you're not already over the line by that stage. And look, and literally you just finished off that issue 8. It looks fantastic. I'm delighted with it. I feel storytelling wise, it's a bit of a left turn, and it would have totally fallen on his face with the wrong artist, and I'm so glad you were able to do it. And thanks so much, man. I'll talk to you soon. You will basically live down the road, so we should meet up once you're wrapped up.
Yeah, and thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks everyone. This has been Tape Deck, video editing by Jamie Wood Edits, and I'll catch you next time.